from my perspective, Trump took America first into America alone.
Hi, I'm Ian Bremmer, and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast, an audio version of what you can find on public television, where I analyze global topics, sit down with big guests, and make use of little puppets. This week, I'm talking with Montana Governor and Democratic presidential candidate Steve Bullock, the very rare, heck, even endangered political animal who convinced voters in a deep red state to go blue. But he's polling around 0%. And that didn't qualify him for this month's debate. So I'm asking the question, can he pull this off? Let's get to it.
The GZERO World is brought to you by our founding sponsor, First Republic. First Republic, a private bank and wealth management company. Imagine a bank without teller lines, where your banker knows your name and its most prized currency is extraordinary client service. Hear directly from First Republic's clients by visiting firstrepublic.com.
Governor of Montana, Steve Bullock.
Ian, it's great to be with you.
Good to be with you, sir. You are running for president.
I am.
Which is an objectively ludicrous thing to do. I mean, did you? At what point did it become obvious to you that, my God, I'm actually making this decision, me personally, I'm gonna say that I can be president of America?
Yeah, and certainly wasn't, even as I was serving initially as governor, it wasn't the thought, I'll be governor of a state, I'll run for president. It was sometime after the 2016 election. And it was two different things that really pushed me along the way to that. One of which was, so I was the only Democrat in the country to get reelected, right, in a statewide race where Trump won. He took Montana.
Won by 20.
Yeah, he won by 20. I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And it was interesting because I was asked to travel quite a bit after that. Mm. And when I'd go to Democrat groups or progressive groups, and I'd say 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump, invariably the response was, what's wrong with those voters? Or a little skeptically like, what's wrong with you, Bullock?
Yeah. And there could be some overlap.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah. Never like, how is it that if people are voting their economic, their healthcare, their education interests, they ought to be voting for Democrats? How is it that in a state like Iowa, a third of their counties went Obama, Trump. And places where we should be winning, we're losing. So that was part of it, just the concern of the further polarization and Democrats not getting that if we are a party of just the coasts, we're never going to be able to win and we'll never be able to govern. And then the other piece that really, I guess, hit me is that, look, I think everybody walks in the start of a new administration with some hopes that government can function in a constructive and positive way for people's lives. I mean, maybe if we'd started with infrastructure instead of repealing the Affordable Care Act, but it was not only, I guess, what he's been doing as a president, but the way he's been governing. I mean, the behavior that he's now normalizing. I do think it's a challenging time in this 243-year experiment called representative democracy, which should require anybody to stand up and say, we've got to get back to some norms and we could do a lot better if what we're going to do is pass on to the next generation something better than what we have.
Now, you among the candidates know a lot of Trump voters a lot better, right? So given that, I mean, who are these people in Montana? What are they like? What excited them about Trump? Why are they still supporting him?
Yeah, and I think in part, like, there are folks all across this country that want to say, like, a Trump voter is sort of monolithic, right? They're all exactly this. And I think that that's a mistake for us, because I think that my view is Trump was the result, not the cause. Meaning when, 60% of Americans haven't had a pay increase in real terms in 40 years. When you look at it when I was growing up in the early 70s, 90% of 30-year-olds doing better than their parents were at age 30. Today, it's only half. So a whole lot of folks just felt like the economy's not working for me, Washington, D.C. is captured by dark money, or it's captured by, it doesn't represent my needs, so why not blow up the system? And in some respects, I think that was a lot of the Trump voters is saying that he said he'll drain the swamp, even though it's swampier today than ever was.
Well, the cabinet certainly is extraordinarily special interest, but that was one of his big messages, right? Is drain the swamp.
Yeah, I would get D.C. working for you. And he also said he'd have workers' backs along the way, even though most of the policy prescriptions that he has sure hasn't been helping those workers or those farmers or those factory workers. So I think in part the Trump voters initially were saying that the economy and the political system isn't working for me. So why not take a risk on somebody like this? And as we go on, we've seen, his favorabilities haven't been that high. I continue to think there's about 35% of this country that certainly be with him no matter what. But what we've got to do is focus on those folks that ought to be voting with us and bring them back. Because this is, in some ways, this is math, right?
It's another candidate that already has that, right?
Yeah,
so you don't really want to go there.
Not math in the Yang terms, but math in that we've got to be able to win back places that we lost. The Michigans, Wisconsins, the Pennsylvania, if we're going to win this election.
Big issue dividing the country right now, gun control.
Yeah.
You're in a red state, you're governor, there's a lot of hunting, a lot of NRA card-carrying Republican members. You want to get rid of assault weapons. Yeah. How can you sell that to those people?
Well, I think let's begin with some of the basics. Like, I'll never forget, after the Vegas shooting,
hundreds and hundreds of people injured by one crazy guy.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in my office and say, when we were asked to lower the flags, I'm like, I don't even know what to write in this proclamation. And a young coworker or staffer says, we now have templates for mass shootings. I've lowered the flags 9 times since Vegas, 7 times since Parkland. A fourth of the times under President Obama and President Trump since I've been governor. So I think we're finally hitting this point that we know that we have to do more. You point out like the NRA, and I'm a gun owner, right? I hunt. I'm like 40%.
Isn't it mandatory in Montana to own a gun?
We'd let you in, even if you didn't. But it's actually 40% of the households in this country have a firearm in it. So it's not just a Western thing. But I'm also a parent and a governor. If we could ever look at this as a public health issue, not as a political issue, we would know what to do. Universal background checks, the vast majority of NRA members, the vast majority of Republicans agree to that.
Do you talk to NRA in Montana? I mean, as an organization, you talk to them in Washington. Have you had any? Because all the things that you're saying sound abundantly sensible, but they are not moving through Congress.
But that's exactly my point. Think about it. When I was growing up in Montana, the NRA, it was a gun safety, hunting, and shooting organization. I'll give you 30 million reasons why zero progress has been made on even background checks. That's the $30 million the NRA has invested in Trump's election. Think about right after Parkland. He said immediately, we should probably have universal background checks.
Remember that, that's right.
Yes, Governor.
President, again, thank you for having us. I approach this certainly as a governor. I approach it as a gun owner. That 11-year-old son got his first deer this past fall.
He's a good boy.
I approach it as a victim. I had a nephew shot and killed, an 11-year-old on a playground. Here is a moment where everybody's talking, where we can hopefully start saying, what could actually meaningfully impact this, not just for today, but for the future?
He made one phone call to Wayne LaPierre and he walked backwards.
Yeah.
Same thing after El Paso and Dayton. So I think that the only way that we make progress in some ways is either finally disassembling the NRA and figuring out where that money's actually coming from, because, sort of if you look at gun safety issues, I think it is tied to sort of the dark money world, this post-Citizens United world. But I also think that at some point, even gun owners have to stand up and say, we agree on a lot more than we disagree, and nobody's trying to take everyone's guns away. And some of these, what I would say, are public health measures that we can all agree on, like universal background checks, ought to be a no-brainer at this point.
Now, you talked just now about dark money, and on your sort of first day to-do list, you say executive order making
disclosure requirements, or these corporations are not going to get government contracts. Why cannot that not be a piece of legislation that can't be overturned by the next president? Why does that have to be just an executive order?
Well, on the one hand, it shouldn't be, right? So I was Attorney General before I was governor and had actually brought the states together against Citizens United, wrote the brief that the majority of states, even a bunch of Republican states, signed on to. Then after that didn't work out, brought the first case to the U.S. Supreme Court, trying to take apart Citizens United.
Last summer, Montana led more than half the states in asking the court to address the narrow federal issues presented by Citizens United. Instead, the court reached a broad decision that questions more than a century of law in Montana and across the country. Yet the case and reactions on both sides of the political aisle have largely overlooked the decision's impact on the vast majority of elections in this country, those that are held at the state and the local levels.
My legislature's almost 2/3 Republican, got passed a bill that said 90 days out from an election, I don't care if you call yourself Americans for America, whatever it might be, you have to disclose every dollar you're spending. And we got that done in a bipartisan basis. So I'd love to see movement in Washington, D.C. I mean, look, before Citizens United, 2% of the outside spending was from groups that don't disclose their donors. Today, it's over half. This isn't, to me, a fringe issue. When we talk about climate, when we talk about gun safety, when we talk about income inequality, when we talk about Costco can negotiate prescription drug prices, but it's illegal for the federal government to do it, I think so much of it does go back to kind of the corrupting influence of money in our system. So the executive order, and I did the same thing in Montana, said, I can't tell you, you can't spend or contribute in my elections. But if you want a contract from the state, you just have to disclose that spending.
I'm wondering, now that you've been on the trail for a few months, have you gotten any pushback, either directly or indirectly, specifically on that issue?
No, I got pushback even when I was moving that legislation in Montana, because it can impact folks on both the left and the right. So not direct pushback in that respect. I do, I've 10 years in public office. I've never had somebody come up to me and say, I just don't think there's enough spending in our elections, right?
Yeah.
When folks recognize that D.C. is not working for them, that we pay more for prescription drugs than any country in the world and we have nothing to show for it, or that the Republican Party is the only major political party in the world now that won't acknowledge climate change is real, or a generation of workers being replaced by independent contractors when union membership is half of what it is in the 80s. People may not look at sort of money in politics as the primary issue, but they see it's impacting everything else.
And I get that completely. I'm asking more about the lobbyists, the special interests, the people that matter for the election and re-election of so many people in office today in the United States, only getting bigger. I'm just wondering, have you heard anything from them?
Yeah, and not possibly because for my 10 years in public office, it's been kind of the fight of my career. And I think it is the challenge of our time. So perhaps those are the ones that will never talk to me anyway. And if so, that's okay, right?
Okay, he's way out there.
I don't
have to really worry about
it. And we've got to figure out a way that even more that everybody feels like they have a stake in these elections. And I think a lot of people in this country just feel like they don't because they don't recognize that their voice, the corporation can't vote on election day, but they can.
And we haven't talked about trade yet. And obviously, big fight right now, most importantly between the U.S. and China, tariffs being raised. You've got a lot of farmers in Montana that have been hurt directly on this issue. You take a pretty tough line on China, but you are not in favor of Trump's policies. Tell me what you think needs to happen.
Yeah, and even, so I was in Rippey, Iowa, a town of, I think, 400 people. 2 stories, and this was just at the grain elevator. So this wasn't a bunch of, identified Democrats. One guy saying, when Trump tweets, we literally lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. And another one, 6th-generation farmer, saying, I don't know if I want my son to go into this. And there's not a chance that these payments from the Department of Agriculture is going to make up for market share. So
subsidies that Trump has been promising in return.
No, that's right.
It's being lost.
Yeah, so they get it. And I think that from my perspective, Trump took America first into America alone in foreign trade and largely in foreign affairs. Look, we should be tough on China. What they did 25 years ago was steel, to credit cards, to microchips. Now they're doing it to tech. But the way to get there, from my perspective, isn't just to say, let's use the blunt instrument of tariffs, because that's not even hitting the tech side where we're having all the theft problems. I mean, the way to bring is to actually bring the global community with us, because the other thing that we've seen is we're ratcheting up this tariff war, that they're actually lowering their tariffs to other countries.
So if the answer is not tariffs, if the answer is Steve is president, we're taking those tariffs off, Chinese yippee.
Yeah.
Why are they changing their behavior?
Well, I think sanctioning, making limits on tech transfer, and just saying we can't do that necessarily. Trying to turn around, because other countries are impacted, our traditional allies by the tech transfer as well, pushing for opening up of their markets. I mean, you would know much better than I. I mean, in the 90s, you had, a $500 billion economy that's now an $11 trillion economy, because the pattern was always the same: create a sanctuary market, invest state dollars into that industry actor, unleash that industry actor on the world. We've seen this time and time again. Yeah, you can seek WTO sanctions and the like, but saying the firm, especially from the tech transfer side, that this just doesn't work anymore.
Now, one other place I wanted to ask you about was on Cuba, because you've come out publicly and say that you would like to end the boycott on Cuba. Not something I would have necessarily expected from the governor of Montana. What was behind that?
Well, I think it was just that we were getting to a point of normalizing relationships under President Obama. And I'm not quite certain why. It seems like the other Trump reflex is anything that his predecessor did, he just immediately wants to reverse. And for the liberalization and opportunities in Cuba, it did make sense to me to continue along that path.
Now, we've covered a lot of policy. We can cover some non-policy. So first thing I have to ask you is, if you're president, what's your Secret Service nickname?
What should my Secret Service?
That's what I was asking you, yeah.
That's what I'm asking you as someone who, I mean, you're a thoughtful, bright man. You could come up with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that W would have done, right? He'd call you Stretch, because you're, sort of tall. Long glass of cool water in the back there. Stretch, answer the question. Okay, you are wearing cowboy boots. Are those for me, or do you always wear those on the trail?
No, I often wear those.
You do?
Both on the trail and at home.
You do?
These are actually alligator boots.
They are, I noticed that. Were any live alligators hurt in the creation of the? Yes, and you're proud of that, right?
I'm kind of proud.
I think that's why you're governor of a red state. I think that's okay. Have you enjoyed yourself in this process?
There are many times you enjoy yourself. First of all, you enjoy yourself when you're actually talking to people that want to believe the government can work and are engaged along the way. And and these aren't the folks, these aren't the Ians of the world, these aren't the sort of all of the intelligentsia. It's just regular folks just saying, we can do better than this. That I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed, my daughter's been too busy, but my 12-year-old son has been on some of these trails, getting to see different things.
Does he understand what Dad is doing?
I think they all do, yeah. Well, they've all kind of lived in this public eye, their whole time.
Now, the question I guess I have to ask.
You do?
I guess I have to. I think I have to. Okay, poll numbers are not knocking the cover off the ball. I think we can say that.
Not yet, yeah.
And stranger things have happened. But do you close the door? I mean, Hickenlooper was closing the door on Senate. Yeah. And now he's running. Yeah. And closing the door was a mistake. Yeah. Are you closing the door on Senate?
I closed the door long before I got into even this race for presidency. And for a couple of different reasons. Like, look, I would like to turn around and we should be also talking about places like Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota.
Yeah, but you can't run in those places.
But we can no longer win in those places.
Also true, yeah.
And if we actually want to win places like that, we ought to have someone at the top of the ticket that can actually help in red and purple places.
And let's assume that we get that person. but it isn't Steve.
Oh, let's see. Who else actually won in a red or purple state?
No, I get it. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I mean, but you are closing the door. You are closing the door.
Closing the door, and I'll do everything possible to make sure that we have a nominee that can actually win.
Governor Steve Bullock.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be with you.
Great to be with you as well.
That's our show this week. We'll be right back here next week, same place, same time, unless you're watching on social media, in which case it's wherever you happen to be. Don't miss it. In the meantime, check us out at GZEROmedia.com.
The GZERO World is brought to you by our founding sponsor, First Republic. First Republic, a private bank and wealth management company. Imagine a bank without teller lines, where your banker knows your name and its most prized currency is extraordinary client service. Hear directly from First Republic's clients by visiting firstrepublic.com.
You're listening to the GZERO World with Ian Bremmer podcast, your weekly geopolitical deep dive into the world's biggest news stories, featuring in-depth conversations with global leaders and newsmakers. To get more of GZERO's insights on global politics every morning, sign up for our free newsletter, GZERO Daily, at GZEROmedia.com.